The late evening air in the city always carried a certain charged hum. For Anna Davis, it was the sound of people chasing dreams, whether to get ahead or simply survive another day. She often stayed late at the firm, not out of love for her job, but because she wanted to prove something, to herself, her colleagues, and her boss, Gregory Lewis. Gregory had built a reputation as a charismatic leader who could spot potential buried under layers of self-doubt. He was also known for his exacting standards. Beneath his polished exterior and genial smiles, Gregory was ruthless. Promotions didn't come easy under him, and Anna wanted hers desperately. It was during one of those long, quiet nights when her journey took its unexpected turn. The office was nearly empty, the overhead fluorescent lights buzzing softly, and the only sounds were the occasional click of keyboards and the shuffle of papers. Anna was hunched over her laptop, rechecking figures on a presentation for Gregory's pitch the next day. "Still here?" The voice startled her. She looked up to see Gregory leaning against her cubicle wall, a coffee in hand. His crisp navy suit was still immaculate, and his piercing blue eyes studied her with faint amusement. "Oh, yes," she replied, smoothing her blouse nervously. "I just wanted to make sure everything's perfect for tomorrow's meeting." Gregory smiled. "That's what I like about you, Anna. You go the extra mile." The words, seemingly casual, landed heavily. Praise from him was rare, and it felt like sunlight breaking through the clouds. She smiled back, trying to keep her composure. "Thank you. I'm just trying to keep up with the team." His gaze lingered for a moment too long, and she felt it, a shift in the air between them. "You're not just keeping up," he said, his voice lower now. "You're ahead. You just don't realize it yet." Before she could respond, he glanced at his watch. "Come by my office before you leave. I'd like to go over some final details for the presentation." She nodded, her heart thudding. She told herself it was excitement at being noticed for her hard work, nothing more. When she stepped into his office 20 minutes later, Gregory had removed his tie, and the usually intimidating space felt oddly intimate. He motioned for her to sit, and as they reviewed the presentation slides, his tone softened. He shared stories about his own climb to the top, his setbacks, and the people who had helped him along the way. "You remind me of myself when I started," he said, leaning back in his chair. "Hungry. Willing to do whatever it takes." The words hung between them, and Anna felt a knot tighten in her stomach. Was he testing her? "I just want to succeed," she said cautiously. "And you will." His smile was warm, but there was something behind it, a calculation. But in this business, success isn't just about numbers and hard work. It's about connections. Trust. Loyalty. Her breath caught. Was she imagining the undertone? The way his gaze drifted from her face to her hands resting on her lap. She felt a sudden rush of heat, both from embarrassment and something else she didn't want to name. This was the moment she had to make a choice. Weeks later, Anna was promoted, and her salary bump made the late nights and sacrifices seem worthwhile. Yet, as thrilling as it had been to receive the recognition, something gnawed at her. She told herself what had happened with Gregory was a transaction. A mistake she wouldn't repeat. But it wasn't so easy to compartmentalize. The secret simmered beneath the surface of her days, especially when she saw Gregory in meetings, his voice commanding the room, acting as if nothing had happened. The confidence that once drew her now felt oppressive, like a weight pressing against her chest. Worse still, Anna found herself second-guessing every compliment, every new responsibility he handed her. Was it earned, or was it the aftermath of what she'd done? She didn't want to think about it, but the echoes of that night were impossible to escape. The tension lingered for years, dulled only slightly by the birth of her children. Anna never thought about Gregory in those days, she didn't let herself. She threw herself into her roles as a mother and a wife to Ryan, the man who had stood by her through thick and thin. But even the strongest walls can crack, and hers fractured one ordinary morning. She was standing in the kitchen, pouring cereal for her 6-year-old son, Luke, when he tugged at her sleeve. "Mom, can I have chocolate milk?" "Sure, Jacob," she said absently, before freezing mid-reach. Jacob. Gregory Jacob Lewis. Her boss's full name flashed in her mind like a neon sign, and the realization struck her like a blow. Luke didn't notice her falter, happily munching his cereal. But Ryan, sitting at the kitchen table reading the newspaper, stiffened. He looked up, his brows furrowed. What did you call him? Anna tried to recover, her voice shaking. Luke. I meant Luke. No, Ryan's voice was measured, dangerously calm. You said Jacob. It was just a slip, she insisted, her stomach twisting into knots. I must have been distracted. But Ryan wasn't letting it go. His eyes stayed locked on hers, searching for answers she wasn't ready to give. Why would you call him Jacob? The room seemed to close in around her. Anna scrambled for an explanation, but none came. The silence stretched painfully, until Ryan finally stood, his face unreadable. We're doing a DNA test. Anna's heart stopped. What? Ryan, that's ridiculous. I don't think it is, he said quietly. His calmness frightened her more than if he had yelled. And if there's nothing to hide, you won't have a problem with it. She opened her mouth to argue, to insist it wasn't necessary. But her voice failed her. Somewhere deep down, she knew she couldn't deny him this. Ryan was already walking out of the room, leaving her alone with Luke's innocent chatter. The walls of Anna's carefully constructed life were beginning to crumble, and she could do nothing to stop it. The DNA test loomed over her like a storm cloud, and with each passing day, she felt the weight of her choices pressing harder. She could only hope that the storm wouldn't destroy everything she'd worked so hard to protect. The house felt quieter in the days after Ryan demanded the DNA test. Anna had thought silence was something she'd learned to live with, but this was different. It wasn't the soothing quiet of her kids playing peacefully or the hum of a home at rest. It was the kind of silence that carried accusations, one that wrapped itself around her and squeezed like a vice. Ryan had said little since that morning in the kitchen. He went about his routines with clinical precision, speaking to her only when necessary, and even then, his words were clipped and deliberate. Anna couldn't tell if he was protecting himself from further hurt or waiting for her to confess. She wasn't sure which terrified her more. The real fracture came when Luke bounded into the living room one evening, holding his favorite book. Dad, can we read tonight? Ryan, who was sitting on the couch scrolling through his phone, froze. His jaw tightened, and for a moment, Anna thought he wouldn't answer. But then he smiled, strained and faint, and motioned for Luke to sit beside him. Of course, buddy. Anna watched the exchange from the kitchen doorway, a dull ache settling in her chest. Luke didn't know. He couldn't know. To him, Ryan was his hero. His dad. The thought of that bond being ripped away was almost too much to bear. When Ryan began reading, his voice steady and low, Anna slipped away. She couldn't stand to watch. Her footsteps carried her to the upstairs bedroom, where she closed the door and sank onto the bed. The sheets smelled faintly of their laundry detergent, lavender and mint, a scent she used to find calming. Now, it only reminded her of what she stood to lose. Anna's mind raced, replaying every decision that had brought her here. She'd made peace, or so she thought, with the memory of that night with Gregory. It was supposed to be buried, a regrettable mistake sealed away in a box, never to be opened. But now, that box was shattered, its contents spilling out into her perfectly curated life. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand, jolting her out of her spiraling thoughts. She hesitated before picking it up. Gregory's name on the screen sent a cold shiver down her spine. Gregory, can we talk? She stared at the message, her thumb hovering over the screen. Why now? They hadn't spoken beyond work matters in years. Gregory had moved on, she'd assumed. He wasn't married, but he lived his life unburdened, as if their indiscretion had been nothing more than a fleeting distraction. Finally, she typed a response, not a good time. The reply came almost instantly, it's important. Anna threw the phone onto the bed, pacing the room as panic bubbled beneath her skin. If Gregory suspected something, if he was reaching out now, it could only mean trouble. She couldn't let him drag her further into the abyss. The next day, Ryan brought the DNA test kit home. He didn't announce it, there was no dramatic unveiling. He simply left it on the kitchen counter, a silent challenge. Anna stared at the small box as if it were a ticking time bomb. Are you going to say something? She asked finally, breaking the tension. Ryan didn't look up from where he was unpacking groceries. What is there to say? This is ridiculous, she pressed, trying to sound firm but faltering under his icy calm. You can't just. Anna. His voice cut through hers like a blade. When he turned to face her, his expression was unreadable, but his eyes burned with something she couldn't name. Let's not do this. The test is happening. End of discussion. She opened her mouth to argue but stopped herself. There was no point. Ryan had made up his mind, and she knew him well enough to understand there was no reversing it. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Anna kept herself busy with chores, desperately trying to distract herself from the weight of impending doom. She cleaned the house until her hands were raw, organized closets that didn't need organizing, and cooked a dinner she barely touched. All the while, the DNA kit sat on the counter like a specter. That night, after the kids were in bed, Ryan finally broke his silence. I need you to understand something, he said, standing in the doorway of their bedroom. His voice was steady, but the undercurrent of pain was unmistakable. If this test comes back the way I think it will, I'm not just walking away from you, Anna. I'm walking away from everything. The words knocked the air out of her lungs. Ryan, you don't mean that. He crossed his arms, leaning against the doorframe. Don't I? You've lied to me. For years, you've let me believe, his voice cracked, but he swallowed hard and continued. You let me love him. You let me think he was mine. Tears blurred Anna's vision. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I made a mistake, one mistake, and I've been trying to fix it ever since. He shook his head, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. Fix it? Is that what you call this? Living a lie? Making me part of it without my consent? Please, she whispered, stepping closer, but he held up a hand to stop her. I don't think you understand, Anna. If that test proves he's not mine, you're going to lose more than just me. You'll lose this family. He turned and walked away, leaving her standing in the dim light of their bedroom, the weight of his words crashing over her like a tidal wave. Days passed, each one heavier than the last. The DNA test had been sent off, and now they waited. Every moment felt like an eternity, the silence between Anna and Ryan more deafening with each passing hour. She threw herself into her children, pouring every ounce of her energy into their care, as if she could somehow shield them from the storm brewing just beneath the surface. But she knew it was futile. The truth was coming, and there was no stopping it. One evening, as she was tucking Luke into bed, he looked up at her with those bright, innocent eyes. Mommy, are you and Daddy okay? The question shattered her. Of course, sweetheart, she lied, brushing a hand through his hair. Why do you ask? He shrugged, his small fingers fiddling with the edge of his blanket. Daddy seemed sad. Did I do something wrong? Her heart broke. Oh, no, Luke. You didn't do anything wrong. Daddy's just tired. Grown-up stuff, you know. Luke nodded, accepting the answer, but Anna could see the doubt lingering in his eyes. She kissed his forehead and turned off the light, her chest tightening as she closed the door. Downstairs, Ryan sat at the dining table, staring at his laptop but clearly not working. The DNA results could come any day now, and they both knew it. The air between them was suffocating. I want to fix this, Anna said softly, breaking the silence. Ryan didn't look up. Can't fix what's already broken. His words echoed in her mind long after she'd gone to bed, lying awake in the dark, waiting for the truth to finally destroy the life she'd built. The email arrived on a Tuesday morning. Anna had been in the kitchen preparing breakfast, her hands moving mechanically as her mind wandered in endless loops of worry. Ryan was at the table, a mug of coffee in one hand and his laptop open in front of him. His silence had become her constant companion, a reminder of everything unsaid between them. She noticed his sharp intake of breath before she saw the flicker of movement on his screen. He stared at the email for a moment too long, the tension in his shoulders visible even from across the room. Anna froze, the plate she was holding slipping slightly from her fingers. Is it? She whispered, her voice barely audible. Ryan didn't answer. Instead, he closed the laptop with deliberate care and stood, the scrape of the chair legs against the floor jarring in the quiet morning. Without a word, he left the kitchen, heading for the small office at the back of the house. The plate clattered into the sink as Anna followed him, her heart pounding in her chest. She caught him just as he closed the office door behind him, locking her out. Ryan, please, she begged, pressing her palm against the wood. Just tell me what it says. There was no answer, only the muffled sound of his footsteps pacing the room. Anna pressed her forehead to the door, tears stinging her eyes. The weight of her guilt was crushing. She had spent every day since Ryan demanded the test bracing herself for this moment, but now that it was here, she felt utterly unprepared. Minutes dragged by like hours. Finally, the door opened, and Ryan stepped out. His face was pale, his eyes shadowed with a grief she had never seen before. "It's not mine," he said quietly, the words heavy with finality. Anna's legs buckled, and she leaned against the wall for support. "Ryan, No," his voice was sharp, cutting her off before she could begin. "I don't want to hear it. Please, just let me explain," she pleaded, but he shook his head. "Explain what, Anna? That you lied to me? That you let me believe I had a son? That you let me love him, care for him, build my life around him, knowing all along he wasn't mine?" His voice cracked, his composure slipping. "You don't get to explain this. Not now." Anna reached for him, desperate to close the growing chasm between them, but he stepped back, the distance between them suddenly insurmountable. "I need time," he said, his tone colder now. "I can't even look at you right now." He walked past her, his steps heavy, and Anna sank to the floor, the enormity of what she had done crashing over her. She wanted to scream, to beg him to stay, but the words lodged in her throat, suffocated by her shame. The days that followed were a blur of unbearable silence. Ryan moved into the guest room, his interactions with Anna reduced to the barest essentials. He was still attentive to Luke and their younger daughter, Claire, but the warmth that once defined their family dynamic was gone. Every moment felt like walking on shattered glass, each step more painful than the last. Anna tried to carry on as if nothing had changed, for the sake of the children. But Luke was perceptive, and his questions about why Daddy wasn't sleeping in their room anymore cut her to the core. "Is Daddy mad at you?" he asked one night as she tucked him in. "No, sweetheart," she lied, forcing a smile. "Daddy's just dealing with some grown-up problems. It's not your fault. Will he move back soon?" Luke's voice was small, his eyes wide with worry. Anna's throat tightened. "I hope so," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. One evening, a week after the results had arrived, Ryan came home later than usual. Anna was in the kitchen, stirring a pot of soup, when she heard the front door open and his footsteps approach. She braced herself, hoping he might finally be ready to talk. "Anna," he said, his tone devoid of the warmth that used to accompany her name. She turned to face him, clutching the wooden spoon like a lifeline. "Ryan. I've made a decision," he said, his expression unreadable. Her heart sank. "What do you mean?" "I'm filing for divorce." The words struck her like a physical blow. "No," she said, shaking her head. "Ryan, please, don't do this. We can fix this. I'll do anything, counseling, therapy, whatever it takes." He sighed, his shoulders slumping. For a moment, she thought she saw a flicker of pain in his eyes, but it was gone as quickly as it came. "It's not just about us," he said quietly. "It's about me. I can't stay in this marriage knowing what I know. Every time I look at Luke," his voice broke, and he looked away, blinking rapidly. "I love him, Anna. God, I love him so much. But he's not mine. And every time I see him, I'm reminded of what you did." Tears streamed down Anna's face. "He doesn't know, Ryan. He doesn't have to know. Please, don't take this away from him." "I won't," Ryan said firmly. "I'll always be there for him. But I can't be here with you." He turned and walked out of the kitchen, leaving Anna standing there, her world crumbling around her. Late that night, Anna sat alone in the living room, staring at a framed photo of their family from a vacation 2 years ago. They had been happy then, truly happy, or so she thought. She traced her finger over Ryan's face in the picture, her heart aching with the weight of everything she'd lost. Her phone buzzed on the coffee table, the screen lighting up with a name she hadn't expected. "Gregory." Anna hesitated before picking it up. "Hello." "Anna," Gregory's voice was calm, almost too calm. "I heard about the test." Her blood ran cold. "How?" "It doesn't matter," he said smoothly. "What matters is what you're going to do next." "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice trembling. You and I have unfinished business, he said. And I think it's time we talk. The morning after Gregory's call, Anna sat in her car outside her office building, her hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that her knuckles turned white. She hadn't responded to Gregory's cryptic message the night before, but his voice echoed in her mind, "You and I have unfinished business." What could he possibly mean? Her phone buzzed again. Gregory. She ignored it, but the unease in her chest refused to dissipate. What could he possibly want now? He had already been the catalyst for the unraveling of her life. What more could he take? That afternoon, her worst fears began to materialize. Gregory strode into her office unannounced, his presence commanding as always, but this time it carried a darker edge. He closed the door behind him, his gaze locking on hers. "Anna," he said, his tone a mix of familiarity and authority. "We need to talk." "I don't have time for this, Gregory," she said, her voice firmer than she felt. "Whatever it is, it can wait." He ignored her, stepping closer. "I know about the DNA test." Her breath caught. "How do you?" "Let's just say I have my ways," he interrupted smoothly. "The point is, I know Luke is mine. And I think it's time we addressed what that means." Anna stood, her stomach twisting into knots. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about Luke and Claire," Gregory said. "You know as well as I do that they deserve a better life. A stable home. A father who can provide for them in ways Ryan never could." Her jaw dropped. "You can't be serious. Ryan is their father." Gregory raised an eyebrow. "Is he?" "Legally, maybe, but biologically? No. And courts tend to favor biological parents in custody disputes." Anna's chest tightened. "You can't just take them away from him." "I'm not just taking anything," Gregory replied, his voice calm but chilling. "I'm offering them a better future. A future where they won't have to live under the shadow of lies and betrayal. Think about it, Anna. Wouldn't they be better off with me?" Her mind reeled. Gregory had always been calculating, but this was beyond anything she could have imagined. "This isn't about them," she said finally. "This is about control." He shrugged, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Call it what you want. But the fact remains, I have rights, and I'm prepared to fight for them." When Anna relayed Gregory's threats to Ryan that evening, she expected outrage, maybe even a fierce defense of their family. Instead, Ryan's reaction was startlingly calm. "Let him have them," Ryan said, his voice devoid of emotion. Anna stared at him, horrified. "What are you talking about? You're just going to give up." "They're not mine," he said, his eyes fixed on the floor. "I've spent years loving kids that weren't mine. Maybe it's time for someone else to take over." Tears spilled down Anna's cheeks. "Ryan, please. Don't do this. They need you. They need stability," he said, his tone clipped. "And clearly, I'm not the one to give it to them." "But you're their father," she cried. "You've been there for them since the beginning. DNA doesn't change that." Ryan finally looked up, and the pain in his eyes was undeniable. "Doesn't it? Anna, every time I look at them, I see your betrayal. I can't live like this anymore." She reached for him, but he stepped back. "I'm filing for divorce," he said, his voice firm. "And before you start, I'm not fighting for custody. I'll walk away clean. But I will take my share of what's rightfully mine." "What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice trembling. Ryan's lips pressed into a thin line. "Half. Half of everything you own." Her heart sank. Ryan had always been fair, even generous, during arguments about money. But this wasn't a request, it was a declaration. The legal proceedings moved faster than Anna could have anticipated. When Ryan's lawyer laid out his demands, the truth of her situation became painfully clear. Ryan's assets were minimal, the family home was registered in his parents' names, and his savings were meager compared to hers. But Anna's late father had left her 2 apartments in the city, a significant inheritance she had always taken for granted. "Those apartments were from my father," she protested during a meeting with her lawyer. "Ryan had nothing to do with them." "It doesn't matter," her lawyer replied, his tone sympathetic but firm. "They're marital assets now. He's entitled to half." The thought of losing the apartments was devastating. One of them was rented out, providing steady income, while the other was a fallback, a safety net she had always considered untouchable. Now, that safety net was slipping through her fingers. The court hearing was brief but brutal. Ryan didn't argue for custody of the children, stating simply that he wanted to move on. His detachment stung more than Anna expected, but the real blow came when the judge ruled in his favor regarding the division of assets. Half of Anna's property, including the apartments, would go to Ryan. As the judge delivered the verdict, Anna sat frozen in her seat. She had fought so hard to build a life for her family, only to watch it unravel in the span of weeks. When they exited the courtroom, Ryan approached her, his expression unreadable. "For what it's worth," he said quietly, "I never wanted it to end this way." Anna's voice caught in her throat. "Then why?" "Because I deserved the truth," he said simply. "And you took that from me." Without another word, he turned and walked away, leaving Anna standing in the courthouse hallway, clutching the remnants of her shattered life. Anna sat in the small, sunlit room where everything would come to a head. The family court had been arranged hastily after Gregory filed his petition for partial custody. He claimed he only wanted what was fair, his biological right to be a part of Luke and Claire's lives. But Anna knew better. This wasn't about the children. It was about control, revenge, and power. Her lawyer had warned her not to expect miracles. Gregory's legal team had already painted her as an unfit mother, someone who had deliberately deceived multiple parties for years. The truth was a weapon Gregory wielded with precision, and Anna had no doubt he intended to crush her with it. Ryan was seated across the room, his expression distant. He had shown up only because he was subpoenaed, but his presence was as cold as his demeanor. Anna glanced at him, hoping for some sign of support, but he avoided her gaze, his shoulders rigid. He was here as a formality, a silent bystander in the unraveling of her life. The judge entered, and the proceedings began. Gregory's lawyer was slick, presenting a picture-perfect image of a man ready to embrace his role as a father. He had resources, stability, and the determination to provide a better life for the children. Anna's lawyer countered, emphasizing the emotional damage such a drastic change would cause. Luke and Claire had known Ryan as their father their entire lives, and uprooting them would serve no one's interests. But Anna could see the cracks forming in her case. The DNA evidence was irrefutable, and Gregory's financial stability was undeniable. He was a powerful man with the means to shape the narrative, and the judge was listening. Then came Gregory's testimony. "I regret the circumstances that brought us here," he began, his voice smooth and practiced. "But I can't ignore my responsibilities. Luke and Claire deserve to know where they come from. They deserve a father who can give them every opportunity in life." Anna's fists clenched beneath the table. He spoke as if Ryan's years of love and sacrifice meant nothing, as if he could erase the past with a flick of his pen. When it was Anna's turn to speak, she rose on unsteady legs. Her voice trembled, but she forced herself to be strong. "My children are not pawns," she said, her gaze locking on Gregory's. "They are not prizes to be won or assets to be divided. Luke and Claire have a father, Ryan. He's the one who held them when they cried, who taught them how to ride their bikes, who stayed up late helping with school projects. Biology doesn't make a father. Love does." The courtroom fell silent, the weight of her words hanging in the air. For a moment, Anna thought she saw a flicker of doubt cross Gregory's face, but it was gone before she could be sure. The judge called for a recess, and Anna stepped outside, needing air. She leaned against the cold marble wall, her heart racing. The future of her family rested on the whim of a stranger, and it was unbearable. A familiar voice broke through her thoughts. "Anna." She turned to see Ryan standing a few feet away. For the first time in weeks, his expression wasn't cold. It was something closer to sadness. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice sharper than she intended. "I wanted to say I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I should have fought harder. For them. For us." Her defenses crumbled, and she shook her head. "It's too late, Ryan." "Maybe," he admitted. "But I thought you should know, I told the court the truth." She frowned. "What truth?" "That Gregory doesn't care about those kids," Ryan said, his voice firm. "He's using them to punish you." And I told the judge that if he takes them away from you, he's making a mistake. Whatever happened between us, you're still their mother. You're the one they need. Anna stared at him, tears welling in her eyes. Why would you do that? After everything I've done? Because it's not about us anymore, Ryan said. It's about them. Before she could respond, the bailiff called them back inside. The ruling came swiftly. The judge, weighing the arguments and testimonies, determined that Gregory's request for partial custody was not in the children's best interests. Ryan's testimony had tipped the scales, painting Gregory's motives as self-serving. Luke and Claire would remain with Anna, with Gregory granted visitation rights only under strict supervision. The relief that washed over Anna was overwhelming, but it was bittersweet. She had won the battle, but the cost had been steep. As she gathered her things, Gregory approached her, his expression unreadable. "This isn't over," he said quietly, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "I'll be watching." Anna met his gaze, her fear replaced by a steely resolve. "Do whatever you want, Gregory. But you'll never have them." He smirked, but it lacked his usual confidence, and she watched as he walked away. That evening, Anna sat on the couch with Luke and Claire, their laughter filling the room as they played a board game. For the first time in weeks, she felt a glimmer of hope. Ryan's absence was a gaping hole, but she knew she had to rebuild, for her children and for herself. Later, as she tucked them into bed, Luke hugged her tightly. "I love you, Mommy." Her throat tightened, and she kissed the top of his head. "I love you too, sweetheart. Always." The house was quiet as Anna sat alone in the living room, staring at the remnants of the day's chaos. Her phone buzzed on the coffee table. She picked it up, her heart sinking when she saw the sender, Ryan. "For what it's worth, I don't hate you. I just couldn't stay. Take care of them, and yourself." Anna stared at the message for a long time before setting the phone down. The weight of her choices would never leave her, but she would carry it for the sake of her children. They were her second chance, a chance to do better, to be better. As the night deepened, Anna finally allowed herself to breathe. The storm had passed, but the scars it left behind would take a lifetime to heal. What would you do in Ryan's shoes? Was Anna's redemption enough, or did Gregory deserve a second chance? Share your thoughts below.